Welcome. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. I'm Alma Vizcarra, the Membership and Communications Coordinator for the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. Thank you for joining us for our first online worship service of 2021. This past year was defined by social distancing, and hugs, grasping a hand, and nearly all forms of touch were necessarily avoided. But our lives and our legacies are defined by how many lives we touch, if only figuratively. This morning, the Reverend D. Scott Cooper brings us a message titled, The Touch of 2020. He reflects on some of those people that we lost in 2020 and who touched many lives. Reverend Scott is joined by Carol Burrows, Director of Religious Community. Music Director Mark Vogel is joined by the Sanctuary Choir, Jim McGee on flute, and Carolina Mueller on violin. Some of you may be new to this congregation or the online services, so let us say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalism is a faith where you can bring your whole self, your full identity, your questioning mind, your expansive heart. As Unitarian Universalists, we join together on a journey that honors everywhere we've been before. Together, we create a force more powerful than one person or one belief system. Our beliefs are diverse and inclusive. Rather than a creed, we share a covenant based on a set of 7 principles. These include the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the knowledge that we are a part of an interconnected web of all existence that calls us to honor the earth and all creatures. We now invite you to hear our call to worship.
Our call to worship this morning is by Sylvia L. Howell. We bid you welcome on this first Sunday of the new year. Like Janus, we gather with part of us looking backward and part of us looking forward. We gather on the edge of the new year, saddened by our losses, cherishing our joys, aware of our failures, mindful of days gone by. We gather on the cusp of this new year, eager to begin anew, hopeful for what lies ahead, promising to make changes, anticipating tomorrows and tomorrows. We invite you to join our celebration of life, knowing that life includes good and bad, endings and beginnings. We bid you welcome.
Celebremos compartiendo nuestras vidas, encendiendo esta luz. For the earth forever turning, for the skies for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures in their silent majesty, for the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to thee. For the
Please join with me in the spirit that some call meditation and others name prayer. Make yourself comfortable. Relax. Take one deep breath and then another. Open your mind. Open your heart. This morning I share the prayer As a New Year Begins by the Reverend Kate Lohr. Great Spirit of life, as a new year begins, we turn inward to reflect about the state of our lives. What lessons have we learned in the past year, and which new ones now call us forward? To whom do we still owe an apology or expression of thanks? And with whom must we draw fresh boundaries? As we pause from our regular rhythms of rush, 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 we open ourselves to new perspectives and possibilities. We give thanks for these moments and for the wisdom they afford us. May they help bring us together in the sacred dynamics of life so that we, as individuals and as members of this community, might reach our full potential. As we step across this threshold, let this new year be a year of greater awe and gratitude, of deeper kindness and acceptance, and more courageous acts of conviction. For a kinder, more equitable, and sustainable world is not only possible, she is on her way. And in the quietness of this sacred community, we can ever hear her breathing. May the congregation, absent in body, though present in spirit, say Amen. We pause now together to lift up that which sits heavy and light on our hearts. Courtney Langer, a daughter of Dave Eliash's cousin and a healthcare worker, has contracted COVID. We pray for her and her entire family, including her 5-month-old boy, as she recovers. Jan Eliash's niece's uncle has died of COVID, and the aunt has contracted it as well. We mourn with those who have lost a loved one. Also, Jan's brother, Jeff Stokes, who has been fighting health problems, was hospitalized with a recurrence of C. diff, which postponed a planned surgery. We continue to send healing energy to him. We are rejoicing with Richard Brostad, who has been released from the hospital and is doing well after a mercifully brief encounter with COVID. We also rejoice with Tamara and Tony Veneruso, whose first great-grandchild, Olive Sue Stolle, was recently born. I invite you now to say the name or bring to mind those you wish to be held by the loving embrace of this religious community. They are part of the great cloud of witness and memory, and we will, even if we do not know their names, hold them in our hearts. In this great cloud of witness and memory, amid this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. Let us remember the suffering and joy amid and among our community that we do not know. We pause in awe and wonder of the mystery that is life. In the spirit of love, in the spirit of hope, and in the spirit of compassion, I invite each of you to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
us through our journey. This is my prayer. This is my prayer. This is my prayer.
This morning, our offering will be shared with the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry. Let's hear from Chuck Freeman, the Executive Director.
Buenos dias and Happy New Year, First UU Houston. I'm Reverend Chuck Freeman, honored to be the director of your Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry, 36 of our congregations, of which you are one, organizing for justice in Texas. Let me tell you about some things we have done and what we will be doing. With the leadership of your ministers and your Justice Coordinating Council, we formed the Texas UU The Vote Collaborative, touching over 42,000 voters in this past election. As you know, we had record turnout in Houston, record turnout in Texas. I do believe it made a big difference. We were able this time, using our 501c4, which the IRS allows us to recommend vote candidates to our constituency. We call it our values voting recommendations. 13 of the candidates we recommended to you won election. Now, our 25 of our congregations voted on these 5 issues for the legislature starting January the 12th of this month. Racial justice, environmental justice, healthcare access, economic justice, and voting rights. We're going to be working with allies like the Black Caucus to get the George Floyd Act bill and other good things going. So it is wise for you to invest in our Texas UU Justice Ministry, because together we will bend Texas toward, and joining with me now, justice.
Today, through our shared offering to the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry, we are helping to educate and organize member congregations to advocate effectively for public policies that uphold Unitarian Universalist principles. So I ask you to give generously. An offering will now be gratefully received.
This reading is by the poet Anne Sexton, entitled The Touch. For months my hand was sealed off in a tin box. Nothing was there but the subway railings. Perhaps it is bruised, I thought, and that is why they have locked it up. You could tell time by this, I thought, like a clock by its 5 knuckles and the thin underground veins. It lay there like an unconscious woman, fed by tubes she knew not of. The hand had collapse, a small wooden pigeon that had gone into seclusion. I turned it over and the palm was old, its lines traced like fine needlepoint and stitched up into fingers. It was fat and soft and blind in places, nothing but vulnerable. The dog won't do it. Her tail wags in the swamp for a frog. I'm no better than a case of dog food. She owns her own hunger. My sisters won't do it. They live in school, except for buttons and tears running down like lemonade. My father won't do it. He comes in the house, and even at night, he lives in a machine made by my mother and well-oiled by his job. The trouble is that I let my gestures freeze. The trouble was not in the kitchen or the tulips, but only in my head. my head. Then all this became history. Your hand found mine. Life rushed into my fingers like a blood clot. Oh, my carpenter, the fingers are rebuilt. They dance with yours. They dance in the attic and in Vienna. My hand is alive all over America. Not even death will stop it, death shedding her blood. Nothing will stop it, for this is the kingdom, and the kingdom come.
Excerpt from Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted, something your hand touched some way so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you are there. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The difference between the man who just cuts lawns and a real gardener is in the touching, he said. The lawn cutter might just as well not have been there at all. The gardener will be there a lifetime.
sed nos alumbra, solo la sed nos alumbra.
It's the first Sunday of a new year, and I don't remember a change in the calendar ever being more anxiously anticipated. If hindsight is 2020, we have rarely been so relieved to have 366 days, yes, it was even a leap year, behind us. But still, in some ways, it is just a timekeeping construct, a flipping of the page on a calendar, a turning of the hands of a clock. What will make it different is our attitude and what we make of the differences. Thankfully, we will have a vaccine, and at some point, we will gather together in person again. Different political leaders on the national stage promise change. What we have learned because of the trials of a very difficult year and about ourselves and our fellow citizens will inform how we approach new events and new decisions. Yes, it's a flipping of the page on a calendar, but it's also an important psychological change to reset our attitudes and priorities. In my homily right after Thanksgiving, I reminisced about a print in my grandparents' home. It showed 5 kittens, and each was doing something that represented one of the 5 senses. Who would have dreamed that those senses would be numbered among those things some of us found ourselves missing in 2020? Some who contracted the virus first realized they had it when they found their senses of taste and smell were diminished or had vanished. I had one report of a patient who said some food and drink tasted like wildly different, but very specific other flavors. Because Zoom and YouTube are a poor substitute, we have had to make do with seeing one another on a computer or TV screen. We had no option but to listen to one another's voices and the beautiful harmonies of our musicians, soloists, and choir on speakers. I hear of folks longing to see their friends and loved ones, to hear their voices and greet them in person. But perhaps, even more than these, people tell me they want to reach out and give others a hug, touch one another on the shoulder, shake the hand of a friend. There's no denying we humans need the element of touch. As Anne Sexton wrote in our first reading, "For months my hand was sealed off in a tin box." And all this is metaphor, an ordinary hand, just lonely for something to touch that touches back. Of course, people not only physically touch other people, but we figuratively touch one another's lives by doing those things that bring passion, change, and love to those lives and the world. This time last year, I revived the practice of looking back at some of those we lost the previous year. Those who touched others' lives, sometimes well beyond even what they realized. I've realized that in a year whose events have wrested attention from even the most influential of those who died, it is often difficult to separate those people from the events of the year. And of course, there are thousands more people whose good works will outlive them than I have time to describe in one sermon. Perhaps I would do well to look at some of the events of the year and remember some of those associated with them. In a year defined by a devastating pandemic, at least 2 other subjects demanded our attention: politics and civil rights. The world of politics produced much to hold our attention in 2020. Besides the primaries, debates, and election, the vast range of reactions by elected officials to the pandemic, proper precautions, and financial help to a devastated constituency was astonishing. Fatalities due to the coronavirus to national elected leaders have been few. However, after attending a Tulsa rally for the president, where few people wore masks or socially distanced, Co-chairman of Black Voices for Trump, Herman Cain, became infected with the virus and later died. Representative-elect Luke Letlow, who campaigned without either social distancing or wearing a mask, died from COVID-19 just days before being sworn into Congress. He was only 41 and left behind a wife and 2 small children. Other losses from the political stage this year were unassociated with the pandemic. Many people were devastated by the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg in September. Known as the notorious RBG to her many admirers, she developed a cult-like following over her more than 27 years on the Supreme Court, especially among young women who appreciated her lifelong fierce defense of women's rights. Making few concessions to age and health problems, she showed a steely resilience and became the leader of liberal justices on the court. 2 civil rights icons both died on July 17th. The Reverend C.T. Vivian was an early and key advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King. He organized pivotal civil rights campaigns and spent decades advocating for justice and equality. Representative John Lewis, who had a long and celebrated career in Congress, died on the same day. His bloody beating by Alabama state troopers in 1965 helped galvanize opposition to racial segregation. Lewis was one of the original 13 Freedom Riders. The Freedom Rides revealed the passivity of local, state, and federal governments in the face of violence against law-abiding citizens. Lewis and other nonviolent Freedom Riders were beaten by angry mobs and arrested in the South. The photos of the bloody victims wounded on the Edmund Pettus Bridge were published worldwide and publicized the efforts of those fighting for justice. 55 years after the media made it impossible to ignore the brutal violence against people of color by state troopers and county posses on Bloody Sunday, the country witnessed the death of George Floyd. A Minneapolis police officer knelt on Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes, snuffing the life out of him for allegedly passing a counterfeit $20 bill. Video of Floyd's death and those of other citizens like him made it virtually impossible for white citizens to continue to dismiss incessant claims of police brutality by people of color. Believing that such claims were overblown or that victims must have provoked the police somehow became harder and harder to believe or justify. This triggered the other predominant event of note of 2020, the worldwide protests of police brutality against people of color. From Minneapolis to Floyd's hometown of Houston to over 2,000 cities and towns in over 60 countries, people protested police brutality and in support of Black Lives Matter. People would gather to protest despite having to wear masks, despite the pandemic, to take a stand against injustice. One of the most difficult things the pandemic stole from us this year was our ability to gather together in person without having to consider the risk. Not just at church events, but at restaurants, concerts, movies, and theater, and at sporting events. Theater, television, and music lost their share of memorable voices this year. Theater lost 2 groundbreaking and powerful playwrights, Larry Kramer and Texan Terrence McNally. On Broadway, we said goodbye to acclaimed actress Zoe Caldwell and musical theater talents Rebecca Luker and Anne Reinking. Other musical genres saw the passing of household names Eddie Van Halen, Little Richard, Kenny Rogers, Helen Reddy, and Mac Davis. Evenings of dinner and a movie were no more. We lost not only those evenings out, but we lost beloved stars of the silver screen, including Kirk Douglas and Olivia de Havilland. While those two luminaries were over 100 years old, we also lost the fiercely talented and brave Chadwick Boseman, who embodied James Brown, Jackie Robinson, and of course, Black Panther in the movies. He succumbed far too young to cancer. Shelter in place arrived, and we tried to make do with takeout or delivery and binging or streaming movies and television shows. But like the movies, we lost some of our television favorites this year. We said goodbye to newscasters Jim Lehrer and Hugh Downs, and TV perennials Alex Trebek and Regis Philbin. Many of us were entertained during our childhoods by homespun castaway Marianne, Dawn Wells, Ken Osmond, the two-faced Eddie Haskell, and Jerry Stiller, the Festivus celebrating Frank Costanza on Seinfeld. Some sporting events hobbled along with athletes in bubbles and quarantined, and with cardboard cutouts in the stands and piped-in cheering. Other events, like the 2020 Summer Olympics, were postponed. Like live theater and concerts, sports can be watched on television, but it's not the same. The electricity generated between performer or athlete and a crowd cannot be duplicated virtually. And of course, we lost athletes of note this year. Kobe Bryant, one of the greatest basketball players of his generation, perished with his daughter in January in a helicopter crash. Don Shula won the most games of any NFL coach and led the Miami Dolphins to the only perfect season in league history. Tom Seaver was a Hall of Fame pitcher, but it was Whitey Ford who had the best winning percentage of any pitcher in the 20th century. 2020 is already the deadliest year in U.S. history, due mainly to the coronavirus pandemic. While final data won't be available for several months, preliminary numbers suggest that the United States is on track to see more than 3.2 million deaths this year, at least 400,000 more than 2019. So in such a year, it is not difficult, sadly, to list easily recognizable names of folks who have passed away. But I want to talk about others as well. Others who touched lives in their worlds, created change, but are less well known. I mentioned both the Reverend C.T. Vivian and Representative John Lewis in their instrumental role in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But it was a lesser-known man, Bruce Carver Boynton, who inspired the Freedom Rides and who died in November. Boynton was arrested 60 years ago for entering the white part of a racially segregated bus station in Virginia and launched a chain reaction that ultimately helped to bring about the abolition of Jim Crow laws in the South. Boynton's parents were also early civil rights activists. His mother, Amelia Boynton Robinson, was honored by President Barack Obama 50 years after being savagely beaten while demonstrating for voting rights. These are people who helped make huge changes in the world, yet we do not know their names. Of course, not everyone makes their mark in politics or civil rights. Not everyone can literally fly faster than anyone before him, like Chuck Yeager, the first person to exceed the speed of sound. We each have our niche. Unitarian, futurist, and genius Buckminster Fuller asked, "What is my job on the planet? What is it that needs doing that I know something about that probably won't happen unless I take responsibility for it?" I talked earlier about our losing our ability to go out to dinner and the theater when COVID hit. Two other individuals who are not household names made their mark in restaurants and theater and passed away from COVID, and I'd like to share their stories. I heard about Andreas Andy Koutsoudakas on the Today Show. An immigrant from Crete, he came to New York and with a love of hard work, family, food, and his neighborhood, created 2 beloved neighborhood restaurants in Tribeca. He fell ill from COVID and was confined to the hospital. To honor his father, his son, Andy Jr., a lawyer, paid a nearby restaurant to feed the frontline medical workers lunch and dinner. When his dad passed away in March, Andy Jr. suggested the many folks who loved his father not send flowers. Instead, he started a GoFundMe page, which raised $55,000, which his son used to buy personal protective equipment and supplies for hospitals and nursing homes in his beloved dad's beloved neighborhood. He also renovated his dad's diner to make sure it remains a fixture in the neighborhood. Nick Cordero was a Tony-nominated actor who lost a battle with COVID at the age of 41. Robust and talented, with his career and family life ahead of him, news of his illness gave a face to the lie that the virus only attacks the elderly and those with underlying conditions. His health setbacks included mini strokes and blood clots, and he was often unconscious. His wife, actress Amanda Klutz, sent him daily videos of her and their 1-year-old son so he could see them if he woke up. And she urged friends and fans to join a daily sing-along. The Broadway community was devastated by his loss, as were the friends and family of Andreas Koutsoudakas. They had touched lives by living their passion. They ask, what is my job on the planet? What is it that needs doing that I know something about that probably won't happen unless I take responsibility for it? Their stories are not secret. They were publicized. But outside their circles, they are not well known. And of course, many others who touched at least as many people did not have their stories told in the press. And so I end by talking about the over 330,000 people in the United States alone who have died this past year because of the pandemic. Few of them were shown on magazine covers or mentioned on the TV news. They probably didn't help change laws to become more just or win a Grammy, Emmy, or Oscar. They were remembered as part of a growing and often record-breaking number of people who died too soon and often too young. But more important, they were people who will be remembered for touching the world and those lives around them. As Ray Bradbury wrote in our first reading, everyone must leave something behind when he dies. A child or a book or a painting or a house or a wall built or a pair of shoes made or a garden planted. Something your hand touched, some way so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. They may not write an article about us in the Houston Chronicle when we die, and we probably won't be featured on the evening news. But we can certainly leave something of worth behind. We can touch the world and touch other people's lives for the better.
De noche, heremos de noche, que para encontrar la fuente, solo la sed nos alumbra, solo la sed nos alumbra.
May your life be as a song, resounding with the dawn, to sing awake the light circles in the night, ever dancing circles in the night, ever dancing circles in the night.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, "I would like to be remembered as someone who used whatever talent she had to do her work to the very best of her ability, and to help repair tears in her society, to make things a little better through the use of whatever ability she has, to do something outside myself." May you go forth and use your talent to do your work to the best of your ability, to do something outside yourself, to touch lives and make things a little better through the use of whatever ability you have. May we all go forth, and amen.
Sadly, although it's a new year, our church buildings remain quiet. However, our online presence remains vibrant and active. There continues to be a wealth of weekly and monthly offerings to keep you connected and engaged with our community. Join us this morning at 11:30 for the Coffee Half Hour. Ring in the new year with your favorite hot beverage and some new and old friends. The Creative Writing Group meets today at 2. The group welcomes a full range of artistic expression from the traditional to the experimental. The Women's Book Club will meet Monday at 7, and the Men's Group meets Thursday at 7 for their monthly evening of conversation. Join the Wednesday discussion group at 5 p.m. to hear a presentation of the U.S. rollout for COVID-19 vaccines. Many of the topics for upcoming discussion groups on our website, firstuuhouston.org/online-group-meetings. Visit there for more details and to sign up. And remember, all times shown are Central Standard Time.